Looking at a big tree, does it leave a great dell in the ground? I mean, while it's still growing, not when someone's dragged it out. I mean, no. The ground is still level, or if anything, raised, because the roots have pushed up some earth. Do you see the tree? Well, I'm pretty clear it's taking its nourishment from somewhere. Most of its carbon, if not all, is coming from the air it breathes. You know, it breathes in our carbon dioxide and it breathes out oxygen and pinches the carbon to make its branches and its leaves and its roots. Now, I suspect when it takes in the moisture from the ground, the moisture has already absorbed any of the minerals that can be dissolved in it. And taken that into the tree, which presumably the tree uses, of course. But it doesn't seem that this results in a dell around where the tree is. Even though the tree's been there, say, a few hundred years, the ground around the tree is still more or less flat, or if anything raised, possibly by the presence of the swelling of the roots through time. What I'm saying is, what I'm drawing a parallel to is your diet. You know, I got the impression when I was, if you like, eating a sandwich, that I was using this material to live by and build my own physical body. But increasingly I find, well, I don't need to live on sandwiches, for instance. And people do live on a lot of breads. Many people I do anyway. Grain. That you can live on fruit and veg, in fact. Fruit. Now, I don't mean fruit hasn't got some substance. It's not just liquid, is it? But it is, I don't know, 90-odd% liquid. You know, even the pulp that you've left, if you take the pulp out, it's still got a lot of water in it, moisture. So I've come to the conclusion we live on not solids, but things that are in liquid form that we put into the body, yes, but we put into the body not just the food we eat, but the air we breathe. And I might point out, what also comes into the body is all sorts of radiations that we just, well, that pass through us. And perhaps we net, or perhaps we are transformed by. Just like we receive sound, of course. And because the sound has symbolic meaning to us, we gain wisdom by it. And this changes our values, attitude, mind, body posture, life itself. So, The one extreme that the world tends to live by is that we rely on food. It didn't take too much enlightenment to realize we also relied on breathing, air, and of course liquids. And then, well, it does take a bit of scientific understanding. I don't know, we know that we benefit from sunlight. Just simplistically, it's nice on a sunny day and we're happier. If we lay in the sun, providing it's not too long and too hot, too strong, we feel relaxed and pleasant, and people like sunbathing. Okay, we may have wrecked the ozone layer or something, and therefore you should be cautious of too much, but we should be cautious of too much eating and drinking too. I suspect we could even take in too much air, breathing, if we hyperventilated long enough. And perhaps that's why in the Eastern view of yogic breathing, it has to be long and deep and slow, and what seems to be understood there, a long pause on the hold of the breath. Which of course brings me to Kriya breathing, but triangular breathing and so on. But do you see, certainly in the Eastern view, there is a shift from reliance on solid foods to a greater reliance on correct breathing, and eating much less, in fact, and much more narrowly, not eating meat, for instance, not eating things that are too spiced, not eating things that are been left. They should be fresh. Probably not eating cooked things too. But it goes much further than that. Eastern view is that you can live on prana, life force, which enters the body. Well, they think of it in terms of at the medulla oblongata in the back of the skull, where the hollow is in top of the spine, bottom of the skull. But we know we receive electromagnetic radiation from all directions all the time. I don't mean that's in itself necessarily the prana that we can live by. But one can understand that there could be such a thing as prana. And it could be, in a sense, what's regenerating us when we sleep. We seem to need sleep, and yet sleep is not doing anything apart from resting well. If you leave most things that are a bit lifeless to rest long enough, they just disintegrate and decay. They don't fill with life, do they? But we do. There's something about sleeping that regenerates, and it's not that we're eating. You could say, well, it's not using the body for an extensive period of time so that it has time to rebuild. Could be. That's a good theory, but might not be the right one. It could be that we get recharged in sleep, and that's why we can rebuild, possibly only when we're sleeping. But not likely, because we know that if we cut ourselves, it can heal within a few hours. I mean, to a large extent. I don't mean completely and show-wise, but you feel, oh, well, it seems to be okay. Stopped bleeding and it's congealed over, and it's a graze, it will wear off, I'll live with that. You feel that the body's already repairing, doesn't need to fall into sleep to do it. And perhaps in a sense that's what the yogi, if you like, is doing. He's repairing or developing not just his body, but his mind and his spirit. You know, if spirit is a distinct entity to mind, I mean, mind is not too clearly defined, is it? It's not, you know, here's a chunk of mind. I could presumably point to a chunk of brain, but only by supposition that this is what somehow affords the mind to exist. But mind is something a bit like the notion of thought, isn't it? I mean, perhaps it is the same as thought. It's not something you can weigh and analyze in the same way as you can analyze matter. Where was I? Hang on a minute. Yes, what I want to say is, when we breathe air, well, the air is not just oxygen and nitrogen. It's got a bit of moisture in it too, depending on how dry the air is, but you know. And therefore, is it also carrying minute amounts of other substances that, bacteria, for instance, they're pretty complex, aren't they? Are they also going into our lungs? The answer is well, yes. And what happens if we're filtering out this life form, albeit what we might classify as a lower life form, and using its composite materials? Yeah, you might say, yeah, but this is incredibly thin on the ground. Yes, that's true. But perhaps significant. Perhaps we only need minute amounts of these substances. You know, the New Age medicine of homeopathic mixtures that have absurdly minute amounts, so much of the material that's supposed to be of help and nourishment, and yet all sorts of claims. And of course, the medical profession says, well, yes, well, it's probably placebo effect. It's more likely psychological. You know, suddenly the medical profession comes up with, oh, well, it's psychological. It's because you think you're being helped. Well, okay, if psychological it is, that's a sort of interesting avenue of medicine to follow. Why don't you? You know, why do you have these extremely strong medicines and so on? Oh, because they seem to work. Oh, well, okay, yes, all right. But that doesn't mean to say that that's the best way of going about it. But anyway, that's not my purpose here. My purpose here is to say, perhaps we can, let me take an extreme, perhaps we can exist just on breath, not even drinking or eating. In some sense, we know we can for something like, well, certainly 40 days, no problem. 90 days, most people die before they get that far. But then most people aren't used to experience of that sort of fasting, and a long fast like that would kill them. You know, it's a bit like a person who's used to running can run quite a distance, even 20 miles, marathon, you know. I don't know what the marathon distance is, but a long way, you know. 20k, is it? I don't know. But, you know, if you get a novice that's not used to running and you tell him to run 20 miles and you force him to, you probably kill him. Perhaps fasting's the same thing, especially if you're not breathing properly, or your lungs are so messed up with normal living that they're not able to do what lungs could do if they were used to going down such an avenue. I don't know, but I am intrigued by the possibility. Well, of course, you probably know from, well, you would know if you follow some of my recordings that I am hooked on a fruit diet. So I haven't gone as far as not eating or not drinking. But I'm fascinated by the possibility of such. Thank you, Heavenly Dad.